It bit through my thin coat and settled deep in my bones. My name is Kim Min-jun, and I was just a boy, not yet 10 years old. My father held my hand so tight I thought my fingers would break. My mother held my younger sister, who was crying silently against her shoulder. We were part of a vast, desperate crowd on the docks of Hamhung. The city behind us was a ruin. The sounds of distant artillery were a constant, terrible drumbeat. We were fleeing. We did not know where we were going. We only knew we had to leave the home we had always known. The enemy was coming, and with them, a future we could not bear to imagine. The American soldiers called it the miracle of Christmas. To us, it was simply the longest night of our lives. Huge US Navy ships loomed in the dark water. They were our only hope. The crowd pushed and shoved. People fell. They were trampled. The cries of lost children mixed with the shouts of soldiers and the groans of the wounded. My father was a fisherman. He knew the sea. But this sea was different. It was a sea of desperation. He kept repeating one thing like a prayer. We must stay together. No matter what, we stay together. His words were a small anchor in a storm of chaos. We were not soldiers. We were not politicians. We were just people, caught in a war we did not start. We waited for hours that felt like years. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every loud noise made us jump. The sky was lit by the unsettling glow of fires burning in the city we had left behind. I saw a woman nearby drop a small bundle of clothes. She started to bend down, but the crowd surged forward. She was carried away, her face a mask of despair. The bundle was crushed under countless feet. It was just a small thing, but in that moment, it felt like everything. It was a piece of a life, a piece of a home, lost forever in the mud and the panic. That's what war does. It takes the small, precious things and destroys them without a second thought. Finally, a soldier directed our family toward a rope ladder hanging down the side of a massive ship, the SS Meredith Victory. The ship was not made for people. It was a cargo vessel. But that night, it was our ark. My father climbed first, then reached down for me. My hands were numb with cold. I almost slipped. For a terrifying second, I saw the black, churning water below. Then my father's strong hand gripped my arm, and he pulled me onto the deck. My mother and sister followed. We huddled together among thousands of other refugees, packed so tightly we could barely move. As the ship pulled away from the dock, I looked back one last time. Hamhung, my home, was a distant flickering light, and then it was gone. Many people call the Korean War the Forgotten War. This is a strange name for a conflict that killed millions. It is strange for a war that tore a country in half and created one of the most dangerous borders in the world. Perhaps it is not forgotten. Perhaps it is a war we have chosen to forget. It began on June 25, 1950. North Korean tanks thundered across the 38th parallel. This was the line drawn on a map by foreign powers after World War II. It was a line that was supposed to be temporary, but it became a wall of fire and steel. The invasion was a complete surprise. South Korea and its American allies were unprepared. The world held its breath. The war was not a simple fight between North and South. It was the first major armed conflict of the Cold War. It was a proxy battle between superpowers. The Soviet Union backed North Korea. China would soon join them. The United States, leading a United Nations coalition, supported South Korea. The fight for a small peninsula became a global struggle between communism and democracy. Young men from America, Britain, Turkey, and a dozen other nations were sent to a place they had never heard of. They were told they were fighting for freedom, but on the ground, in the mud and the snow, it was a fight for survival. Why is it forgotten? It came after the Good War, World War II. It ended in a stalemate, not a clear victory. There were no victory parades like the ones that followed the defeat of Germany and Japan. Soldiers came home not to celebrations, but to a public that seemed indifferent. They had fought and bled in a brutal conflict, but the story didn't have a clean ending. People prefer stories with clear heroes and villains, and a happy resolution. The Korean War offered none of that. It was messy, it was brutal, and it ended right where it started, with a divided nation and a simmering, unresolved anger. So, we did not forget. We buried it. We pushed it aside because it was uncomfortable. It challenged the idea of American invincibility. It showed the terrible cost of ideological conflict. Forgetting was easier than confronting the difficult questions the war raised. What is the price of containing an idea? When is a war truly over? For families like mine, scattered by the conflict, there was no forgetting. The war was not a chapter in a history book. It was the catastrophic event that defined our lives. It was the ghost that haunted our dinner tables, the empty chair that was never filled, the homeland we could never see again. Our journey on the SS Meredith Victory ended on Christmas Day in the southern port of Pusan. We were alive, but we had nothing. We were refugees in our own country. The war, however, was far from over. In the beginning, the North Korean People's Army had been unstoppable. They swept south, capturing Seoul, the capital, in just 3 days. They pushed the South Korean and American forces into a tiny corner of the peninsula, a desperate defensive zone known as the Pusan Perimeter. It seemed like the entire country would fall. The world watched, expecting the worst. The future of Korea, and perhaps the world, hung by a thread. Then, the tide turned with astonishing speed. In September 1950, General Douglas MacArthur, the commander of the UN forces, orchestrated a brilliant and risky amphibious landing at Inchon. It was a masterstroke. The landing occurred far behind enemy lines, cutting off North Korean supply routes. The North Korean army, which had seemed so powerful, suddenly found itself trapped. UN forces pushed out from Inchon and broke out from the Pusan Perimeter. Seoul was recaptured. The momentum shifted completely. The goal was no longer just to save South Korea. The new goal became to liberate the North and unify Korea under a democratic government. My father followed the news obsessively. He listened to crackling radio broadcasts, his face tight with a mixture of hope and fear. UN forces, led by the Americans, crossed the 38th parallel. They pushed deep into North Korea. They captured Pyongyang, the northern capital. They advanced all the way to the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China. It felt like the war was almost over. We dreamed of going home. We imagined rebuilding our house in Hamhung. We thought we might see our relatives again. Victory seemed certain. But this confidence was a dangerous illusion. The war was about to enter its most brutal and bloody phase. China had issued warnings. It would not tolerate American troops on its border. MacArthur dismissed these warnings. He believed the Chinese were bluffing. He was wrong. In late November 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers, the People's Volunteer Army, poured across the Yalu River. They launched a massive surprise attack. The UN forces were caught completely off guard. They were outnumbered and unprepared for the ferocity of the Chinese assault and the bitter cold of the Korean winter. What had been a triumphant advance turned into a desperate, chaotic retreat. This was the offensive that forced the evacuation of Hamhung, the one that put my family on that ship. The dream of a quick victory was dead. The retreat from North Korea was a nightmare. Marines and soldiers fought their way south through impossible terrain and freezing temperatures. The fighting at the Chosin Reservoir became a legend of endurance and courage against overwhelming odds. But for us, the civilians, it was simply a new wave of terror. The war swept back over the land, devouring everything in its path. Seoul, which had been liberated, was captured again by the Chinese and North Koreans in January 1951. The city was left in ruins. The front lines swayed back and forth, a bloody pendulum swinging across the center of the peninsula. The war became a brutal stalemate. The grand movements of armies were over. Now it was a war of hills and trenches. It resembled the trench warfare of World War I. Soldiers fought and died for control of desolate, meaningless hills. They had names like Pork Chop Hill and Heartbreak Ridge. These battles were incredibly costly. Thousands of lives were lost to gain a few hundred yards of shattered ground, only to lose it again the next day. The fighting was attritional, a grim meat grinder that chewed up men and material. The initial hope of unifying Korea was gone. Now the goal was simply not to lose. For my family in Busan, life was a daily struggle. We lived in a makeshift shack built from scrap wood and metal. My father found work on the docks, his hands raw from the labor. My mother sold what little she could in the market. I tried to go to a school set up in a large tent, but hunger was a constant distraction. We heard stories from soldiers and other refugees, stories of battles, of lost comrades, of families just like ours who had been separated or killed. The war felt both distant and terribly close. We could hear the rumble of bombers flying north. We knew that with every passing day, the division of our country was being carved deeper into the land. The fighting was not just on the ground. The skies were a new kind of battlefield. American B-29 bombers systematically destroyed North Korea's cities, towns, and industrial facilities. The air campaign was devastating. It was intended to break the enemy's will to fight, but it also caused immense suffering for civilians. This destruction hardened the hatred on both sides. The war was no longer about a political line on a map. It had become personal. It was fueled by loss, by revenge, and by a deep, unbridgeable chasm of ideology and pain. The 38th parallel was no longer a line of latitude. It was a scar, a wound drawn in blood across the heart of Korea. By the summer of 1951, both sides were exhausted. The dream of total victory was dead for everyone. The only path forward was to talk. Armistice negotiations began in the city of Kaesong and later moved to Panmunjom, a small village located directly on the battle line. These talks would drag on for 2 agonizing years. While the diplomats argued, the soldiers continued to fight and die. The battles for the hills continued, a pointless slaughter to gain a better bargaining position at the negotiating table. Each day the talks stalled, more lives were lost. It was a cynical and cruel phase of the war. The main sticking point was the issue of prisoners of war. The UN command held over 130,000 Chinese and North Korean prisoners. Many of them did not want to be repatriated. They did not want to return to communist rule. The UN insisted on voluntary repatriation, allowing prisoners to choose where they went. The communists demanded that all prisoners be returned, by force if necessary. This was a matter of principle for both sides. For the West, it was about individual freedom. For the communists, the defection of their own soldiers was a huge embarrassment they could not accept. For 2 years, the war continued over this single intractable issue. In our refugee camp, we barely understood the diplomatic arguments. We just wanted the fighting to stop. Every family knew someone at the front. Every day brought news of another death or injury. The war had become a permanent feature of our lives, a dull, constant ache. The hope of returning home to Hamhung had faded completely. We were beginning to accept the terrible idea that the division of our country might be permanent. My father stopped talking about our old house. Instead, he talked about finding a better job in Busan, about my education, about building a new life where we were. It was a quiet surrender to a reality we could not change. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an armistice was signed. It was not a peace treaty. It was simply a ceasefire, an agreement to stop shooting. The agreement established a new border, the demilitarized zone, a 4-kilometer-wide buffer that snaked across the peninsula, very close to the original 38th parallel. The prisoners were exchanged, with thousands of Chinese and North Koreans choosing to stay in the south or go to Taiwan. The guns fell silent, but the war never officially ended. The 2 Koreas remained in a state of suspended conflict, technically still at war to this day. The armistice was not a resolution. It was a pause button that has been held down for over 70 years. Today is March 6th, 2026. I am an old man now. I have lived my entire life in South Korea. I have seen it rise from the ashes of war to become one of the world's most advanced economies. I have grandchildren who have never known hunger or fear. They carry smartphones and dream of futures I could never have imagined as a boy on the docks of Hamhung. Yet the war is not over. I have never been back to my hometown. I do not know what happened to the friends and family we left behind. Are their children still there? Do they think of us? I am one of millions of Koreans separated from their families by that line, the DMZ. We are the living legacy of an unfinished war. The Korean peninsula remains a global flashpoint. North Korea is an isolated, nuclear-armed state. South Korea is a vibrant democracy, a key ally of the United States. Tens of thousands of American soldiers are still stationed here. The border is the most heavily fortified in the world. Every few years, tensions flare. A military exercise, a missile test, or a cross-border incident reminds the world that the forgotten war could reignite at any moment. The conflict is not history. It is a current event, a clear and present danger. The choices made by leaders in Pyongyang, Seoul, and Washington have immediate life or death consequences. The war should teach us a powerful lesson. It shows how ideological certainty, the belief that your side is completely right and the other is completely wrong, can lead to catastrophe. It demonstrates how local conflicts can quickly escalate into global crises, drawing in superpowers with their own agendas. The Korean War was a tragedy for the Korean people, who paid the highest price for a struggle that was not entirely their own. It serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of political division and the catastrophic failure of diplomacy. We must remember this, not just as facts and dates, but as a warning. So when you hear the Korean War called the Forgotten War, I ask you to challenge that idea. Do not forget it. Remember the refugees on the deck of the SS Meredith Victory. Remember the soldiers freezing in the mountains of the Chosin Reservoir. Remember the families torn apart by a line on a map. This war is not a dusty relic of the past. It is a living, breathing conflict whose heart still beats along the DMZ. It shapes our world, influences our politics, and holds the fate of millions in its balance. To remember it is not just to honor the dead. It is to understand the world we live in now, and to fight for the peace that my generation was never able to achieve.